So the question is, to what extent can we implement and trust AI for marketing compliance? And I'm really delighted to have such an informed and intelligent panel who are going to answer some of your questions at the end. But before that, we'll have 20 minutes of just discussion amongst the panel. We did have a brief chat prior to getting on stage, so I know that they've got some really insightful commentary, which will be really interesting for everybody to hear. And we're really trying to ground that in sort of real-world pilots and case studies and data and criteria. So we'll keep trying to bring it back to real-world scenarios. I'm Jess Jones. I moderate lots of events and have done a lot, obviously, in the last year or more around AI. It's just such an exciting area. So I'm really excited to hear what the panel have to say. So just so everybody knows who's who, we've got Guy Shahar here, who's founder and CEO at Blee. We've got Eduardo Rastelli, who's global head of BRR, Legal Risk and Compliance Operations at IHG, and Hardeep Gahir, who's senior legal counsel EMEA at Figma. So before I start posing questions to the panel, I just wanted a quick show of hands to see and also you can join in as a panel as well. So who already has defined criteria for what an AI tool, what kind of criteria it needs to meet before they start implementing it? Does anyone already have that? So kind of a mixture. So interesting to see that, because it's interesting to see, what kind of stages of development everyone's at. We'll come back to that at the end. So Guy, I'd really like to come to you first of all.
And it's the hot seat.
Yeah, I told you it would be the hot seat. And so buy or build is obviously a really topical conversation. So I'd really like your thoughts around that, and what questions are people not asking that they should be?
Yeah, I think we're in a really interesting time where you see the opportunity to build all around you, and it's much more accessible than it used to be. Back in the day, it was like, wait, I need so many resources to just even start thinking about building. So do I have enough engineers on my team? Do I have enough resources? And while those questions are still relevant, now there's a lot more accessibility of tools that you can start and do things on your own. And we're talking to a lot of folks who are getting a lot of pressure to build on their own. And in many cases, it now makes sense. Like if you're an individual that needs some form of, productivity, efficiency that is right there right now, and, the use case is relatively simple, by all means, you should go ahead and try to play with the available tools. I think that for us, when we're thinking about criteria of when you should actually consider not just building because that's not where you want to invest your time, it's where the complexities start to compound. And so thinking about workflows, thinking about knowledge management, thinking about system of record, thinking about deep AI analysis that you need to run, and putting all these components together and coordinating dozens of people in the process, that's where a single sort of like build is probably not going to make sense, because it's going to be time and resource intensive. That's probably beyond where you want to go. And that's where, the evaluation process starts of what is the right vendor.
Yeah. And can I just pick you up on something you said at the beginning? So you're saying people are coming under pressure so what is that? Is that economic pressure to start, just get on with it and start implementing AI now? And I've seen that, myself, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective on it.
I think there's an element of like the shiny toy that everyone feel like they need to be part of, but I think it's more than that. Everyone tells you that this is like the next evolution of technology. Mm-hmm. And so from the top to bottom, everyone's like, we need to be part of it, or we're just going to be late to the game. And so people are looking for the use cases, people looking for the utility. And sometimes that sort of pressure compounds from the top to the bottom, and everyone's like, okay, we just need to do something with AI. And it's very risky, because if you don't know what you're solving for, you might just run before you actually have everything with you for that journey. Yeah. And so that's where we try to advise customers on, let's make sure that there is a real problem to solve and a real use case to solve, and then let's see what tools are available out there for us.
Okay. All right, Eduardo, I think this is the perfect point to come over to you. You're obviously looking at it from sort of the different perspective. So when we strip away vendor criteria and internal politics, what are your perspective around what criteria need to be in place?
For selection of AI tools, or just so you're going to have. I'm sort of echoing Guy's points, but you're going to have some pretty strict sort of use cases, well-defined use cases for what you're trying to solve. I think the way in which we sort of look at like measuring success is, you've got to quantify what that problem is. You've got to understand sort of what good would look like at the end of it, and then ultimately you're sort of you have a view that AI might be able to solve that problem, but there's got to be a level of sort of delivery of whatever it is that metric might be. Crucially, alongside all of that, the big test for sort of AI, I think at the moment, and will continue on, is level of accuracy, how scalable it is, how robust the solution is against all of the different, almost not use cases, but sort of different scenarios in which that use case might be used by people that are using the platform. And those are the three like sort of key areas I think would be super useful to really tick off when you're embedding AI in a workflow.
And when you're actually making the selection around which areas you're going to use AI first, is that based on what the industry is doing, the economics of it, or how do you even start thinking about that?
So stripping it back, like we just spent some time identifying where we think AI solutions can have an impact in the operating model, and identified some really like distinct use cases for AI solutions, and then have just trialed and piloted and started off quite small. Felt out where sort of we think the ceiling is for AI solutions within some of those use cases and where they could be expanded to, and then have just sort of driven those up the sort of value chain as we've gone through. And that's sort of how I'd sort of say that you want to do AI transformation. No, there's no real sort of pressure from an economic perspective. It's more just wanting to introduce scale into the operating model, a robust sort of foundation using AI to deliver your services. But I have heard, anecdotally from other businesses, that the CEOs and CFOs would turn around and say, you have to do this, and either we're going to cut costs or we're not going to increase your headcount or whatever it might be. But that's not something we've experienced. We just want to do it from a sort of bringing in our AI to deliver a foundation to allow our function to scale along with the business.
Okay, interesting. And Hardy, let's bring you into the conversation. Sure. It'd be great to hear, where you've really made those first sort of, where your activity is focused on the first kind of instances when you're looking at AI.
So when it comes to first instances, what we decided to do is try like really low stake work first, because I work in a legal department. The work we do is really, really, it's high stake work. We're looking at reviewing contracts. We work predominantly with a sales organization. The contracts are going out to our customers. So we wanted to start with really low value work, low stake work. So for example, plugging like 40 NDAs, which are quite repeatable, through an AI solution to see what came up, and whether the results were accurate, and whether we needed to implement human intervention, and where in the process was a really sort of good starting point for us.
And in terms of sort of culturally, have you found people are open to embracing it? Are they pushing back?
So culturally, like I work for a scale-up SaaS company. So culturally, like innovation is one of our underlying values. So in our company, people are totally embracing it, almost too much. So we need to like pull them back a little bit. Again, like working for a legal department, you're a little bit worried about where people are sort of using AI without having the proper authorizations in place and the proper due diligence done by our security teams. But yeah, we've had to pull them back a bit. But where I work, everybody's embracing it.
And I mean, that's interesting in terms of the legal perspective, because they almost sort of run counter to each other, don't they? Yeah. This whole sort of highly regulated environments and then bringing AI. I mean, do you feel nervousness around that, or what's your perspective?
No, I don't feel nervousness around it. I think this is the way of the world. Like the guys have said, it's a process of evolution, and we need to get on board with it, but in a measured way. I think that's the correct approach.
Okay, and how are you doing that? Is that through pilots? Is that through testing? How are you really kind of making sure that's tightly contained at the outset?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of playing around with different solutions. Like I said, the best way to sort of do that testing is start with low stakes work, high volume. Yeah. Bury a non-exclusivity clause in like 40 NDAs and see if the AI solution picks it up.
Right. Okay.
And then doing it in a very like measured environment before you put it out there to the rest of the company.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely walk before run.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Particularly in the legal sort of scenario. I think just getting people on board. I don't know if you find like that. It's almost showing them that the level of accuracy is where it needs to be in order for them then to sort of get on the bandwagon. And then they, as soon as you get a couple of the senior people that realise this is a thing, that's when you can really accelerate. But you need to show before you can tell.
And do you have like data points and criteria around the level of accuracy you're expecting, or how are you measuring that? Are you constantly testing?
So you try and start where you start with any sort of agreement, right? But ultimately, you're going to want it to mimic, particularly where when we're talking contracting or sort of content review, you're going to want it to mimic effectively what a human does and be able to identify. At which point the talent of the AI, if you want to call it that, runs out and needs to be escalated. And so, but a lot of that is understanding how to write the protocols for the AI to follow. And so you're trying to figure all of that stuff out whilst trying to get it to a point where it's sort of over 95% accurate. But, and then everyone's going to have a sort of different view about how they measure accuracy, just to be clear. But, we do it on materiality of changes and stuff within the contract that are required post-review. And that's, so long as sort of it's doing everything to remove all of the material at risk from a contract, maybe identifying some of the neater little things that might need a tidy up, that's ultimately for us a really good show of accuracy.
Okay.
I think it's a conversation of building trust from day one with the product, with the team, with whoever you work with. And I think that the expectation should always be, can they report to me as a buyer how well the product is doing and how accurate it is and how we're improving over time and how we're gaining efficiencies. Because if you think about it, we're at a stage that the AI is only good if you have great data.
Okay.
But if you have great data, that also means that you should be able to report on it, and it shouldn't be something that's like a black box that the customer doesn't know about. And so in the process of building that trust with the customer, for us, we're in the marketing review space, in the content review space, it's always around, okay, how well did we do identifying issues?
Yeah.
But also as important, how many false positives did we introduce? Because if you're creating noise in the system because you're not accurate, you're potentially doing more damage than good in many ways. And so I think anyone approaching the process of implementing any AI tool should come with like a perspective on measurement as well.
Okay. And then in terms of like the human in the loop, where is the human where is their role going to be ultimately? And how is that shifting? And how is that going to be different from now to, a year, 18 months ahead?
I think the humans are going to be in the loop my own perspective, and I think Blee's perspective as human is always in the loop, because risk is something that constantly change. And so for a company, you want to be able to capture those small changes in risk and context and nuances in order to remain accurate. And the AI cannot just do it on its own out of nowhere. It needs to come from an input that comes from human. And so you need to figure out how you're building, in our case, workflows to support the AI that would help us feed some of that feedback back into the AI. We always joke that people come for the AI, they stay for the workflows, because it is so critical to have the entire sort of suite all together. And so we believe that humans are in the loop. The question is, can we save 80% of the time for these humans so they can do some more high value tasks? And that's what we're trying to strive for.
And it is going to depend. I was speaking yesterday at something. It's going to be a sort of business decision, sort of where they put their risk appetite, ultimately on processes about where they want, the human oversight or check, but ultimately, lots of businesses, I think, will go through this process of sort of embedding it, testing it, figuring out sort of where their comfort level is in terms of where they want the escalation points and whatnot, and then that will be sort of where they set it, and that will adapt over time, you know. And so long as they see sort of 3 to 4 months of really robust responses from the AI, that might shift, or it might not. It might go back a little bit, right, depending on what the outcome is. But that's going to be a sort of business decision from an risk appetite perspective, and it'll be different across all companies, I think.
Okay, interesting. And have any of you been in a situation where you've implemented something and for whatever reason it hasn't worked and you had to row back?
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting to hear, because I mean, people often don't admit to them.
Yeah. Nothing. None of it's gone. I wouldn't say it's all seamless. Like it's not easy, right? So we had tried a solution, thought it was going to do what was sort of described, and in terms of the accuracy and everything, it just wasn't as robust as we would like. But so you have to sort of remove that. But again, it's sort of similar to the point you're making. It's sort of just sort of walking and figuring that out, right? And figuring out what solutions work for you. The teams at the solutions that work for you, I think, is super important. And being able to translate what you need as a requirement into an end product is really important. But there's plenty of examples where you try something, it's not worked out. But you've never let it get as far as it's fully embedded within anything. You've always been able to you've got the get out of jail free card, basically. Yeah.
And in terms of sort of top tips, is there any way that, I mean, and maybe there isn't, but is there any way you can avoid that, or what would you do in future to sort of change that? It's impossible.
It's a difficult one because until you're there, you can do all the testing in the world and then you implement, and until you're there where you need to pull back, and every scenario is going to be different. Not really any top tips, and I would say it's a great learning curve because once something's gone wrong, you go back and you reassess your criteria, and then you do like extra due diligence on top of that to ensure that doesn't happen again. So I think it's a great learning curve.
Honestly, just starting small. I mean, every provider, every AI business you speak to will say, "Oh yeah, we'll do that," and we're having this conversation at the bar. I think you've got some really generalist solutions out there that will just sort of try and tweak their solution to fit whatever you sort of say to them. And then you've got more specific providers that are trying to solve an actual business problem. But ultimately, you're sort of going to try some of these out and see which ones work for you, where you think some of the limitations are, and a lot of that's going to come down to the team in that provider and how they can sort of turn your requirements into the accuracy that you're looking for. So, but you just got to try and just accept, some aren't going to go as well as what you think, and it's not a plug and play. It's absolutely not a plug and play, 100%.
It's never a plug and play, and I think it's also a game of expectation settings, and so. In this conversation with whoever you work with, it's a conversation of what should I expect, and having, seeing what's communicated back to you in terms of the expectations, the timeline. It's funny because we're in the business of false advertising, but we see a lot of people in the AI space saying, this is going to work tomorrow, and this is going to be a plug and play. And don't worry, there's not going to be any implementation, sort of heavy lifting and stuff. And it's just like inherently, not going to be the case, because there's always going to be adjustments, training. There's always going to be some user testing that needs to happen. And so, again, in the process of building that trust, sort of like aligning on these expectations and being able to see clear milestones as we're reaching those targets, it's a project management like any other that, should be treated appropriately. And sometimes we think, AI, that means it's like very quick and we can skip all the best practices we've had of implementing software before. I think that, it still stays the same.
Okay, interesting. Right, well, I promised that I would open it up to the floor for some questions. Is there anybody who wants to pose the first question?
I think you effectively want a legal agent that, for want of another word, the marketing team interacts with, and it's capable of doing the review, assessment, markup, approval, suggestions, whatever it is, without any human intervention, and then capable of escalating up to a lawyer or a member of the compliance team, whoever's appropriate in your business, where needed. And I think that's sort of the foundational agentic layer that's going to, particularly in-house, it's going to just be apparent across all different types of activities, not just content and marketing review. But that I think is the utopian position. I think that's sort of where, particularly for in-house operator models, that's where it's all going to land for contracting, for other compliance assessments, whatever it might be. That's ultimately where we're going to end up. And I don't think it will take 2 years. You would like to think so. I think there's a sort of efficiency play here from a speed of review perspective, which the marketing team are probably quite keen for legal functions to move more quickly, and so AI can probably help that happen. But again, we're not going to expose it to the marketing team without being completely sure that it's accurate and robust, right, in terms of what the response and markups are for any sort of content that it's reviewing. So again, it's sort of like that. You have to sort of walk through that accuracy play first, I would suggest, before you then even expose it to the marketing team. And then again, after that, you're going to have sort of some high level of diligence about what the AI is effectively doing before you then maybe decide to sort of step back from constant checking and review and sort of move to maybe weekly check on 5% of whatever it's done. So, but that's ultimately sort of where I think it's going, and particularly for the in-house model. Yeah.
I think that usually when you're processing something, we are in the business of content. There's a lot of complexities that go into. Think about it, you're bringing in, let's say, a video. It's a complex media to begin with that has a frame by frame, that has voiceover, that has text on the image. There's a lot of things that are happening on the media itself. Same if you're uploading, let's say, a Figma file. So the media is complicated. Now you have the content that's complicated from a nuance standpoint, from what do you mean your hair is going to look wonderful? Is it? Is it just puffery? So there's a lot of nuance on the content itself. Now you also have the regulations on top that have that sort of fluffiness at time, and it's not very clear what we're trying to say. And then that's without any exceptions of, here's an edge case and all that stuff. So there's so much judgment that needs to go in, and for a single agent to do it with the limited information that they have is quite complicated. And so the alternative for that agent is to okay, I have to put in something, I have to give an answer, and so that's the risk that sometimes comes in. It's part of the financial model, if you think about it, that if the agent just say, I don't know, you stop using the agent and the financial model breaks apart. And so I think that a big part of what we're trying to do in the product, and we took an approach of not black box, meaning everything needs to be explainable, traceable, even if it's for your previous reasoning when you've done feedback on the platform, or the rules, the approved claims, the disclaimer libraries, whatever it may be, it needs to be referenced and being able to be explainable as part of an audit trail thing, essentially. So
I think to Guy's point, it's trying to be positive, but in all seriousness, if you take your underlying sort of prompts that you've put into the back end and put it into an AI and ask to improve it and not lie to you and not make mistakes, and I'm genuinely serious, it will probably come out with a better, more robust prompt.
I can take that question. I'm going to take it from the perspective of the legal sector. So we definitely feel like there will be a change. So in England, the legal sector, we have a 2-year training contract to become a solicitor. So my team and I were discussing this, and we believe that that whole training program would change quite drastically. And compared to what I was doing standing by a photocopier all those years ago, not that long ago, I think it will be very different for trainees who are coming in now, and there will be a completely different set of skills that they'll need to undertake, because legal research will look completely different to the way it does today. I mean, to your point, you'll probably be able to plug in a horizon scanning exercise into an AI and get some kind of summary, which is completely different to the way I did it, which was in a law library looking through books and using the internet. And what we're doing with our team is we're definitely encouraging them to try and do AI courses outside of the day-to-day, but also just play around with different AI solutions and try and get, upskilled in those and learning how to use them. So I had an example in my team. I have a junior lawyer in my team, and she said, well, it's taking me longer using the AI than it is to do this contract review myself. And I remember saying to her, this is a process of evolution. You need to get on board with this, because actually it's a long-term strategy. You need to learn these skills so that when the AI spits out the output in the future, you'll be able to review the contract a little bit quicker, and you'll be able to one thing that we're all learning to do is how do I give the AI better prompts, because you can't use natural language, let's be frank.
I think that's been really informative and covered some really sort of good starting points. And of course, please feel free to continue the conversation with our amazing panelists. So thank you very much, Guy, Eduardo, Hardeep. That's been really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.